All right, diving right in today. Looks like we're tackling the world of PsyOps. You guys sent in a ton of material on how to spot them, so we're going to break it all down.
Yeah, it can get pretty deep. Most people think psyops, they picture like war propaganda,
But it's
but
way more than that, right? I mean, this stuff is everywhere.
absolutely. Everyday life, we're swimming in it.
That's why we're digging into Chase Hughes' work today. He actually trains companies and governments in these techniques, so
He's definitely the authority.
for sure. So first things first, for anyone who's totally new to this, what exactly are PsyOps?
Basically, it's using communication to influence people, not just what they think, but how they feel.
So not just like convincing someone of an idea.
It goes deeper. Think about how emotions drive action. Psyops taps into that
So it's not just wartime stuff then, like we're seeing this in everyday life.
constantly. Ads, news, even social media.
Yeah.
It's all designed to nudge you in a certain direction.
Okay, so give me an example. Like how is this different from just regular persuasion?
Think about a catchy jingle for, say, a cereal brand. It gets stuck in your head, you associate it with good feelings. Next thing you know, you're
Buying that cereal, even if you don't usually eat that kind.
exactly bypasses your logic, goes straight for the emotional connection.
Sneaky. Okay, so why should the average person care about this? I'm not exactly running a government or anything.
Because these tactics are constantly shaping how we see the world, even if we don't realize it, affects our choices, big and small.
From buying cereal to what? Voting for president?
Everything in between, understanding this stuff gives you an edge. You're not just being played by it.
So it's like having a cheat code for the information overload we deal with constantly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Chase Hughes uses this framework called the FATE model to explain how psyops work, how they hook our brains.
Let's break that down.
It stands for focus, authority, tribe, and emotion.
Those sound pretty primal.
They are. They're instincts that we all have, and psyops practitioners know exactly how to exploit them.
Okay, let's start with focus. What's that all about?
Think about how much is competing for your attention every single day. Breaking news, notifications, those clickbait headlines.
They know how to grab your attention.
Right. And once they have your focus, they can start shaping how you perceive things.
So it's not even about the content itself, it's about how they get you to look at it in the first place.
Exactly. Now, the next one, authority. That's all about using experts or studies to make claims seem more believable, even if
If there's no real evidence.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Remember how during the pandemic, there was this push to not question certain narratives, to
Yeah.
just trust the expert?
Oh, yeah, like don't do your own research, that whole thing.
Perfect example. Shutting down critical thinking, pushing compliance.
Makes you wonder who benefits from that, right?
Always got to ask that question. Now, tribe. This one's interesting. It plays on our need to belong, to be part of a group.
So, like creating an us versus them situation.
Exactly. Think about those slogans you hear. Real Americans, or Only Fools Believe.
Oh, yeah, it's like they're creating this artificial tribe, and if you don't agree, you're out.
It's powerful stuff. And finally, we have emotion.
Okay, emotion. I feel like this is where it gets really tricky because emotions can cloud our judgment so easily.
Absolutely. And PsyOps practitioners know exactly which buttons to push. Hope, anger, loss, fear. They use it all to bypass logic.
Think about those heart-wrenching ads for charities or those political ads that make your blood boil.
Exactly. They aim for a gut reaction, not a reasoned response.
So we need to be hyper aware of how our emotions are being manipulated, especially when we're online.
Exactly. The FATE model is a great tool for understanding those primal instincts that make us vulnerable.
But Chase also talks about a brainwashing model, which sounds way more intense.
It does, but it's not about literally brainwashing anyone. It's about understanding the process, how these techniques can subtly shift our perceptions over time.
Okay, so less about mind control, more about subtle influence.
Right. And it all starts with that same F from FATE, focus. But here, it's about creating a sense of urgency, like something's terribly wrong and needs immediate attention.
So they hook you with a problem or make something seem way worse than it is to get you paying attention to their narrative.
Yep. And then they layer on the emotion. Fear to paralyze you, make you feel helpless, then anger to motivate you to act, even if
Even if it's not the smartest move.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Think about how the news cycle often works. Fear, then outrage, and suddenly people are
Sharing stuff online, signing petitions, getting all riled up.
right. And while you're on that roller coaster, they hit you with agitation. Constant updates, problems that never get solved, just
Keeps you on edge, never a chance to calm down and think clearly.
exactly. And all the while, they're using repetition, same phrases, slogans, talking points over and over until
Until it feels like truth, even if there's not much to back it up.
that's the power of repetition. Creates this illusion of consensus. So even if you have doubts, you might think, well, everyone else seems to believe this.
Like unprecedented times or we're all in this together. I hear those everywhere. It definitely creates a certain atmosphere.
Right. It can make questioning the narrative feel like you're the crazy one.
So how do we fight back? How do we become those PsyOps detectives Chase talks about?
That's what we're going to dig into next. He's got some really practical advice on spotting these tactics in action.
All right, bring on the detective work.
Okay, we've really broken down these PsyOps tactics, but I have to admit, it's a little unsettling to think about how easily our own brains can be manipulated.
It is a bit like realizing the world is not quite as solid and straightforward as we thought it was.
Exactly. It's like suddenly seeing those strings you mentioned earlier, the ones pulling our emotions and reactions.
That's a great analogy. And recognizing those strings is the first step to taking back control.
So let's talk about taking back control. What are some of the real-world consequences of falling prey to these tactics? I mean, how does this actually play out in our lives? The impact can be surprisingly far-reaching, and often it's subtle. It's not always about buying a product or voting a certain way. PsyOps can shape our understanding of the world, our relationships, even our own sense of self.
Okay, so give me an example. How could PsyOps affect my view of the world?
Think about how the media, whether it's traditional news or social media, often presents information with a particular slant, a narrative they want you to follow.
Oh, absolutely. Like choosing which stories to highlight, which facts to include, even the words they use to describe a situation.
Precisely. And that framing can subtly influence how we perceive an issue, even entire cultures or countries. For example, a news story that focuses only on the negative aspects of a particular place can instill fear or prejudice, even if that's not a balanced picture.
It's like that saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If we're only shown one side of a story, it's easy to assume that's the whole truth.
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking comes in. We need to question the source, consider the angle, and look for what might be missing from the narrative.
So it's about being active participants in our information consumption, not just passive recipients. But you also mentioned that PsyOps can affect our relationships. How so?
Think about social media, where algorithms are designed to keep us engaged, often by showing us more of what we already agree with.
Oh, yeah, those echo chambers everyone talks about.
Exactly. And those echo chambers can be breeding grounds for division and polarization.
Hmm.
We end up surrounded by people who share our views, and anyone who disagrees is seen as the enemy.
It's like we're being trained to see the world in black and white, us versus them. No wonder it's so hard to have civil conversations these days.
That's a key point. These tactics can make it difficult to bridge differences and have productive dialogues. We lose that ability to see nuance, to understand where someone else is coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
And this isn't just limited to politics, right? I mean, I've seen this play out in online communities about hobbies, music, even food preferences. It's like any topic can become a battleground.
Absolutely. And those online battles can spill over into real-life relationships, creating tension and division among friends and family members.
It's almost like we're being conditioned to be more suspicious of each other, more quick to judge, less willing to listen.
And that's why it's crucial to recognize these patterns, to step back from those echo chambers, and to actively seek out diverse perspectives. It's about remembering that we're all human with our own unique experiences and viewpoints.
Okay, so we've talked about how PsyOps can affect our views of the world and our relationships. You also mentioned that they can even impact our sense of self. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Well, think about how advertising and marketing often play on our insecurities, making us feel like we're not good enough as we are. We need this product, that service, this lifestyle to be happy, successful, attractive.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a constant barrage of messages telling us we need to improve ourselves, buy more things, strive for some unattainable ideal.
Exactly. And that can create a sense of inadequacy, a feeling that we're always falling short. It can lower our self-esteem and even lead to anxiety and depression.
It's interesting because it seems like those messages are often presented under the guise of empowerment or self-improvement. You deserve the best or treat yourself.
That's the insidious part. They tap into our desire to be better, to live fulfilling lives, but then twist those desires to serve their own agendas.
So it's about recognizing the difference between genuine self-improvement and being manipulated into feeling like we need to constantly consume and achieve to be worthy.
Exactly. And that's where mindfulness comes in. It's about becoming aware of those messages, questioning their validity, and choosing to focus on what truly matters to us, not what someone else is trying to convince us we need.
So it's not just about being a savvy information consumer. It's also about cultivating a strong sense of self and a healthy relationship with our own desires and aspirations.
Precisely. And remember, we have a choice in how we respond to these tactics. We can choose to buy into the fear, the insecurity, the division, or we can choose to resist.
Chase actually talks about a more insidious aspect of PsyOps, something he calls the normalization phase, followed by a big reveal. Can you tell us more about that?
He does. The normalization phase is fascinating because it's so subtle. It's about gradually introducing an idea or concept, even a radical one, until it no longer seems strange or outlandish.
It's almost like boiling a frog, right? The temperature rises slowly so the frog doesn't even realize it's in danger.
That's a great analogy. It's about shifting the boundaries of what's considered acceptable or normal. Think about how the idea of self-driving cars went from science fiction to something we see on the roads today.
Or how quickly we've all adapted to virtual reality, which seemed like a futuristic fantasy just a few years ago.
Exactly. These concepts were gradually introduced, woven into our media and entertainment until they became part of our everyday reality.
So they're slowly conditioning us to accept these ideas, even if they might have seemed radical or even impossible at first. And then what happens?
Then comes the big reveal, a major event or announcement that seems to confirm everything they've been hinting at all along. It's designed to shock us, to make us feel like the world has suddenly changed and we need to adapt quickly.
Can you give me a more concrete example?
Imagine if, after years of movies and shows depicting alien contact, there was suddenly a widely publicized event that seemed to prove the existence of extraterrestrial life.
So it's not necessarily about the event itself being real or fake. It's about the way it's presented, the narrative that's built around it.
Exactly. The event could be a genuine phenomenon, a carefully orchestrated hoax, or even something in between. The point is to create a sense of urgency, a feeling that we need to act now, even if that means making decisions based on fear or incomplete information.
And in that moment of shock and uncertainty, what happens next?
That's when they offer the solution, a plan of action that conveniently benefits them. Maybe it's increased surveillance restrictions on personal freedoms or even military intervention. It's about capitalizing on that fear and confusion to push through an agenda that might not have been acceptable before.
It's like they're saying, see, we told you this was a problem, now here's how we're going to fix it. But the fix might actually be more about control than genuine safety or well-being.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to be aware of this tactic, to recognize the pattern of normalization, followed by a big reveal, and to question the motives of those who are offering solutions.
Okay, this is all pretty intense. It's like we're living in a spy thriller, but the stakes are real.
It can feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, we're not powerless. We have agency. We can choose how we respond to these tactics, how we process information, how we interact with each other.
So after really getting into the nitty-gritty of PsyOps, it's kind of wild to think about how much we're exposed to this stuff daily.
Yeah, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, you know? But the good news is now you're equipped to handle it.
Right, like we've been saying, knowledge is power. But where do we go from here? How do we actually put this into practice? It feels like a lot to keep track of.
It is, but it gets easier. Start with those 3 questions Chase gave us. Every time you come across something online, in the news, whatever, that gets a strong reaction out of you.
Boom, hit the brakes and ask those questions. Who benefits? What's the evidence? Why now?
Exactly. It forces you to step back from that immediate emotional response.
Makes you think instead of just reacting, which is probably what they want you to do.
Exactly. And remember all those tactics we broke down, the fate model, that normalization thing? Those are like red flags now.
Warning signs that there might be some manipulation going on.
Right. Time to put your detective hat on and figure out what's really going on.
So, like, if I see a headline that's clearly meant to scare me or get me angry, red flag.
Yeah.
Or if everyone's suddenly using the same phrases, like a script.
Red flag. And especially that us versus them mentality. If you feel pressured to pick a side, that's a big one.
Like, suddenly I'm a bad person if I don't agree with this specific thing.
Exactly. Time to zoom out, see the bigger picture.
Hmm.
Remember, most things aren't that simple. There's nuance, different perspectives.
Makes you realize how much easier it is to just go with the flow, but
But that's how they get you. The more you practice this critical thinking stuff, the better you get at it.
it's like a muscle. Got to keep working it out.
Exactly. And it's not just about what you see online. Chase talks about this, building resilience in your actual life too. Knowing your neighbors, being more self-reliant.
So it's not about being paranoid, it's about being prepared, connected to your community.
Exactly. The stronger you are, the less these tactics work on you.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, this has been a seriously eye-opening deep dive. Anything else our listeners should keep in mind as they go forth and conquer the world of PsyOps?
Stay curious,
Yeah.
stay critical. And remember, even small actions can make a difference. Talking about this stuff, questioning the narrative, it all helps.
It's like shining a light on these tactics takes away their power.
Exactly. We're not powerless. The more we know, the better choices we can make.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And of course, if you want to learn even more, we've got more material for you, so check it out.
Yeah, that document Chase talked about, rating scenarios for their PsyOps potential, that's worth a look.
Definitely. All right, folks, that's our deep dive into PsyOps. Until next time, stay sharp, stay informed, and keep those critical thinking skills honed.